But there's been some key stories that we absolutely wanted to at least just update our viewer on, and so with that in mind, shall we dive in first of all with a few news story updates, starting with the Stonehenge Alliance, I believe.
The Stonehenge Alliance, and perhaps we should also mention the Save Our Sands campaign as well, because there are two major archaeological come political stories that we've been covering for many months now. The plan by the Department for Transport to upgrade the A303 on the Stonehenge World Heritage Site by digging a tunnel, which has proved highly controversial because it has dual carriageway, ramps, entrances and exits, actually taking out a large part of the World Heritage Site. The opponents argue, which includes includes UNESCO. And we've also been covering the Goodwin Sands campaign, which is trying to prevent Dover Harbour Board dredging millions of tons of sand and gravel from the highly sensitive Goodwin Sands off the coast of Kent.
Yeah.
Both those stories, there have been major developments in the last few days, in fact. Starting with Stonehenge, the Stonehenge Alliance put out a video to mark the 100th anniversary, in fact, of Stonehenge being gifted to the nation. And in it, Professor Mike Parker Pearson, one of our leading prehistorians, who was also a signatory to a letter of, I think it was 21 leading prehistorians who wrote to the government basically saying that the Stonehenge proposal was unacceptable on heritage grounds. He is quite outspoken in stating what he believes will be the consequences of the bypass plan going ahead as it's currently configured.
Well, but in the video, it's about 5 minutes and 20 seconds long. In fact, it's precisely 5 minutes and 20 seconds long.
Yes.
He does outline some very good arguments about the fact that we need to consider Stonehenge as not just a monument, but also a monument in a landscape. And actually, the landscape is the story. It's interesting, and he says, the tunnel is only 3 kilometers long, the one that's proposed. That sounds quite big, and but if you're only thinking of Stonehenge as a stone circle, that looks like plenty. But the fact of the matter is that the monument draws its meaning and its context from the landscape around it, which, as far as we can tell, above ground, in fact, one of the entrances is very close to a series of small burial mounds that are likely to be destroyed by this action.
Absolutely. Objectively, one of the key images I think he comes up with as well, which I think is really powerful and is likely to cause the Department for Transport and the people backing the tunnel project some problems if it gets picked up, and obviously it's been designed to be picked up by people watching the video, is that effectively our generation's contribution to the Stonehenge is to create this massive earthwork which dwarfs all the other earthworks in the Stonehenge World Heritage Site landscape.
Yeah,
it's a very telling image. We'll see how it plays.
Yeah, well, yeah, because in a few thousand years, it will be simply another part of that landscape. It's not going to be an obvious modern movement or through the landscape.
Whatever's if you wanted to play devil's advocate and think in the longer term and think in terms of historical irony, you could imagine in a few generations' time, people coming to that landscape and wanting to remove the A303 and the tunnel in the same way that people want to move and have been closing current roads in the landscape in the name of reclaiming it. So, the big lesson, of course, is that the Stonehenge landscape is this massive 4,000-year-old plus continuum. It's said of the history of Wiltshire and by extension the history of Britain.
Yeah, well, and I suppose by highlighting that we are actors in that landscape, I think it's a very interesting way of putting it. Yeah, definitely.
Very much so.
Yeah. Incidentally, there's an additional video recommended on the on this YouTube video, certainly on how it's displayed for me, from Julian Richards as well, with his Stonehenge tunnel objection.
Indeed. Again, another long-term advocate for the Stonehenge landscape, and like Mike Parker Pearson, somebody with an impeccable track record in work on that landscape, and also as a very good broadcaster.
Okay. Anyway, links below, of course, for those. Yeah.
And in fact, I should mention that we mentioned we trailed the Goodwin Sands as well. What's happened there is that last Thursday, in fact, as we're recording, the Save Our Sounds campaign submitted papers requesting a judicial review of the decision by the Marine Management Organisation to grant a dredge licence for the Goodwins.
Right.
They're arguing various procedural points, that the process wasn't as effective or straightforward or complete as it should have been, and that there are flaws in the decision making. That is with the legal authorities, and there'll be a decision in the next few weeks. If it goes forward to a full judicial review, then it will be, I think, highly significant, because it will effectively become a national test case for the licensing system and for the effectiveness of the heritage safeguards in the planning system, because among the people that have come in for criticism in the process are both the private consultants who've been hired by Dover Harbour Board and also Historic England for the way that they've handled it. So if it goes forward and they come under scrutiny, that will be a very significant move in British archaeology.
Okay.
We should add one of the other reasons I certainly wanted to highlight is, both these stories, in fact, highlight the problem of the lack or perceived lack by campaigning groups, certainly, of proper checks and balances within the planning system. They see a rigged playing field, effectively. And in both cases, they're fundraising to carry on the campaigns. And in fact, to go with the judicial review application, Save Our Sands have launched a fundraising campaign on the Crowd Justice platform. Obviously, going to law is a very expensive, high-risk business, and they're asking for supporters to dig into their pockets and make a pledge.
Okay. So, in addition to those two stories, we have good news coming from what was a tragedy for Brazil, and I'm not just talking about the election of a far right-wing president, or rather, sorry, in a very real way, it was a literal loss for the country when their national museum burned down, and thankfully, it seems that most of Luzia, 12,000-year-old fossil, one of the earliest human remains in the world, certainly in South America, most of that fossil has survived the fire. And this is in the context of them having lost around 90% of their collection to the fire. So an astonishing survival and a little bit of good news for the heritage of Brazil, and hopefully for future generations to be able to look back and learn from this fossil in the future. That's
right. I mean, there aren't very many detailed accounts of what's happened and how much has been survived. One of the accounts I read certainly was that the survival, the fossils weren't undamaged. One account, and again we're dealing with translations here, but it talked about being altered by the fire. But yeah.
Well, and in that sense, that it may be discoloration. It may be introducing, maybe some carbon. What's the word? Carbon pollution, essentially, into the bones. So it may compromise it as a scientific, studyable, artifact on that level. But those tests, I think, have already been done in some respects.
Precisely.
But as a touchstone for Brazilian heritage and that museum, it's a very important survival.
Absolutely. When we last covered this story, things were looking very bleak. They were talking about the loss of millions of artifacts and documents. And anybody who saw the video of the fire or of the aftermath, it was a very, very depressing sight. So for anything to come out of it, that's you can't help but feel thankful and hopeful on the part of our Brazilian colleagues who are trying to deal with the situation now.
Absolutely.
Hopefully, as the work progresses, they'll find that more artifacts have survived, even partially, will be a result of the kind of circumstances they're dealing with.
Absolutely,
And
yeah, yeah.
although I
Contamination, that was the word I was after.
so yes,
Yes, contamination.
but I think we have to say, the political issues around the museum and funding and so on won't go away. And you alluded to the election on Sunday of President-elect Bolsonaro. He has a right-wing free market agenda. We'll see how things like heritage and the environment play in that. Certainly, environmentalists are very concerned that he is on record as wanting to open up, for example, parts of Amazonia to logging, which is a threat to indigenous cultures and people. So,
well, and the planet, Brazil, the Amazon is the lungs of the world. So yeah,
yeah, and we saw that there was the Worldwide Fund report on the loss of numbers in across the board in animal and plant species. I think just yesterday. So yes, we're at a I think we're at a pretty significant point. That's all we can say for now.
Yeah. But a little spark of good news there, and also finally in this little packet of news stories, the world's oldest intact shipwreck discovered in the Black Sea.
Yes.
I love this thing. Absolutely fantastic. Archaeologists have found what they believe to be the world's oldest intact shipwreck at the bottom of the Black Sea, where it appears to have lain undisturbed for more than 2,400 years. A 23-meter vessel, that's 75 feet, thought to be ancient Greek, was discovered with mast, rudders, rowing benches, and other specific details of construction all intact due to a lack of oxygen at that depth. Fantastic.
Absolutely, this is a wonderful story on a number of levels, and I have to declare an interest here. Once upon a time, I began a PhD in maritime archaeology at University of Southampton University, and Professor John Adams was my academic advisor on that. The fact that I didn't complete it wasn't John's fault, so I do have to declare an interest here because he's been one of the leading lights in the Black Sea Maritime Archaeology Project, the MAP. It's a wonderful example of academic cooperation and also maritime archaeology using ROVs, remote sensing technologies, because these wrecks are too deep for human interventions. It's been done with proper academic rigor, prompt publication, and it hasn't been funded by fake stories about buried treasure.
No, well, that's genuinely good. That's really refreshing because this is an incredible wreck where they're not expecting to find gold. No nation state's going to be fighting over jurisdiction on this in terms of monetizing the wreck. And actually, one of the outcomes of this particular find is that it's unlikely to be raised because it's so delicate. But that we know it's there, that we can produce a 3D model through scanning and photogrammetry is very, very useful. And also, I love the way how for example, in the article that we've got here, they're showing a picture of the siren vase in the British Museum and how it matches quite beautifully up with the shipwreck itself. It's
yeah. I think that in itself, and it's very smart on their part to make that immediate connection, because here you have a functional artifact, a trading vessel that was lost in circumstances we'll never know, round about 450 BC. And its nearest analogue is on a vase of roughly the same period that is world famous because it depicts Odysseus and the sirens.
Yeah.
And the
strapped to the mast.
I'm sure our viewer will be familiar with the picture. It's Odysseus who's tied to the mast to prevent him leaping overboard when he hears the siren voices. And this was a type of ship. It could have been out of the vase painter's imagination, except that we now know it wasn't.
Yeah, in fact, they probably went down to the harbour, took a sketch, and came back again to the workshop.
You would have been familiar with this kind of vessel. So you
and the rigging as well, actually. So details of where the ropes are on the image. It's all
the rowing benches, everything.
Wonderful.
It's fabulous, and I think this also shows us how archaeology isn't just about artifacts, because this is a direct input into one of the most significant literary artifacts in world culture. The Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey, which is many people argue it's almost a sort of the foundation myth of that underlies most literature. Certainly West literature.
Well, without a doubt. In fact, actually, I saw when I shared this news story on the RKSU Facebook page, one person commented saying that Ubisoft needs to dial down their promotional materials for Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I thought that was quite funny.
It would be nice if Ubisoft, in the public interest, put some more money into this, actually, because what the MAP project in the Black Sea has shown, I think, is the massive potential for doing good archaeology in the deep water with ROV technology that's available now, and long may it continue, and may the reach extend to other watery parts of the planet.
Absolutely.